David, really good to have your historical perspective here,
Thanks,
especially. But what do you make of the way that Facebook and Twitter have been handling the president's post just in the last few hours differently?
Well, there's a sea change since 2016, as you note. I mean, when Zuckerberg said that, I think he really believed what he was saying. Clearly, the evidence that accumulated in the months and years afterwards about Cambridge Analytica, Russian manipulation, and a lot of other factors showed that he was wrong when he said that. But I do think the companies, Facebook and Twitter as well, and YouTube too, have recognized they have a much bigger responsibility to police political speech, particularly around elections, than they used to think that they had. And so now we see them frantically trying to do a whole range of different things. And I think many of them are genuine improvements from the way it happened before. But the quantity of misinformation, disinformation, and frantic speech that is hard to judge whether it's true or not makes their job extremely difficult.
So let's talk about the president's latest posts about winning, about votes being stolen. You know, I believe it is intriguing that these posts can be shared on Facebook tens of thousands of times, and Twitter isn't letting them go any further. I mean, two completely different approaches.
Right, but they're actually being discriminating in different ways about what they label and restrict. So in fact, a number of the posts that on Facebook have a disclaimer statement attached to them are being allowed on Twitter to circulate freely. But a small number of posts on Twitter are being completely hidden and unrepostable, unretweetable, as you noted. But I find that interesting. The standards are different that the two platforms have. But I have to say, it's kind of almost amusing looking at Facebook, because the president has made this whole series of statements. It's kind of like, you know, this loud and somewhat excitable kid on the schoolyard shouting things, and then this sort of Poindexter type very calmly and factually and unemotionally stating a fact. It's like you see, it's like a dialogue. The voting is still underway. The election has not been called, you know, or that kind of thing. But the president's most recent tweet was quite amazing. He's saying that he claims the electoral votes of Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, and he said, "I hereby claim Michigan." Now, everybody knows you can't just claim the electoral votes. It's a matter of how it ends up. And so for that post, Facebook had a very sober, votes are still being counted. The results of the election have not yet been determined. But Twitter hasn't done anything with that same post.
It's not just Trump that's being impacted by this. The chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party is just one of many political officials who has had post flags. He claimed that Biden had won Wisconsin hours before the networks did. In the days ahead, given that the president has vowed to contest the results in various states, talk to us about what is at stake in terms of how these platforms moderate this conversation.
Well, an enormous amount is at stake, and for both platforms, but I would say particularly for Facebook, which, as you know, is the one that I've studied the most, writing a book about it, because Facebook for the United States is the predominant media platform. So it is very important that Facebook figure out how it handles this. And I think they have worked hard to come up with more methodical and reasonable rules, but they are also extremely loath to be too hard on the president. And I think that's been shown over the last couple of years. So they're trying to sort of thread a needle, but their hands are shaking. And I don't think it's very clear what they're going to do. Clearly, they're not going to just let any statement be made and let it rest. They will continue to put these sort of mild, rebuking, sober rejoinders on many of the president's posts. But unlike Twitter, you're not going to see Facebook, I don't think in most cases, and they haven't yet, actually completely bar any statement. So Twitter may end up barring more statements if the president goes further than he has gone, although I think claiming electoral votes is a pretty far cry already. Twitter might take more extreme action. I don't know. but they know they have big responsibilities as major national communications platforms to bear some responsibility for how their platforms are used. And they're just really trying to figure out, sometimes in real time, what that means.